Okay, so I'm going to start the meeting and ask the photographs to leave and clear the room.
Going to the back doesn't work anymore.
Okay, so we are going to start this extraordinary meeting of ENVI, and I would like to welcome Greta Thunberg, and I will ask you to put your earphones on if you want to hear me in French, because I'm going to switch to French for this introductory remark. Je suis heureux de...
I'm very pleased to welcome you here, Greta Thunberg, to this Committee of the European Parliament at the invitation of President Sassoli. You came here already in April 2019, I think. So it's about 10 months ago. You delivered a message to us which told us that we were not doing enough. And of course, you were right. I'd like to start with a quotation. The climate crisis threatens the survival of humanity. We cannot eliminate the hypothesis of catastrophic damage that would lead to the disappearance of human life as we know it. Well, this is a quotation from Greta, but not exactly a quotation by Greta Thunberg, because it actually comes from the JP Morgan Bank. Well, the facts are the facts, and it doesn't matter who is saying them. Some of you in the room will love, adore Greta Thunberg. Others of you in the room may hate Greta Thunberg. But whatever you feel, the facts are the facts. Science is science. And we are in the process of losing the battle of the climate. We've invited you today, and you've accepted our invitation. And that's not just to play the role of a whistleblower. Rather, you're here to help us to build a solution. Your role, which you carry out in an exceptional manner, very effectively, is to pass on the message, to sound the alarm bells. That's what you have been doing for months now. And I believe you've met hundreds of political decision makers who've taken their photo with you. They say that what you're saying is fantastic, but then they've done absolutely nothing afterwards. That is not the mood here in the European Parliament. That is not the mood in Europe today. And it certainly is not the prevailing mood in the Environment Committee of the European Parliament. When we hear the alarms coming from the bankers of JP Morgan and from the scientists, we have to do our bit. We have to be credible scientifically, credible in financial terms, credible in industrial terms. Everyone has their role to play in this. I am deeply convinced that what we need is the energy of our young people. No society is transformed. No society can respond to the kind of challenge we face on the climate if we do not take on board the energy coming from our young people. And you embody that in Europe and at the world level. But Greta, do not be mistaken. Today, you sit before the Environment Committee, which is right at the forefront of the climate struggle. You're not here in the White House with Donald Trump. You're not in Australia with a climate skeptic prime minister. You're not with Bolsonaro in Brazil. You're in Europe. We are building the Green Deal. It's important that we should have energy, but it has to be a positive energy, an energy that brings society with it, that brings on board even the people who are most reticent. So after these words of introduction, I'll give you the floor for about 10 minutes.
English, then we will have the coordinators for each political group and I will ask them, of course, to stick to the time allocated to them. Let's start with your speech for around 10 minutes.
Hi. Hi. My name is Greta Thunberg. I am a climate activist and a part of the Fridays for Future movement. And for over 1.5 years, we have been sacrificing our education to protest against your inaction. And in September, over 7.5 million people all around the world took to the streets, demanding you to unite behind the science in order to give us a safe future. Then, in November 2019, the European Parliament declared a climate and environment emergency. You said that the EU would lead against the existential threat of the climate crisis. And this was wonderful news. When your children set off the fire alarm, you went outside, took a look and smelled the air. And you stated that, yes, the house is actually burning. This was no false alarm. But then you went back inside, finished your dinner and watched your movie and went to bed without even calling the fire department. I'm sorry, but this makes no sense at all. When your house is on fire, you don't wait a few more years to start putting it out. And yet, this is what the Commission are proposing today. When the EU presents this climate law and net zero by 2050, you indirectly admit surrender, that you are giving up on the Paris Agreement, giving up on your promises, and giving up on doing everything you possibly can to ensure a safe future for your own children. Because this law is based on an insufficient CO2 budget that in reality gives us much, much less than a 50% chance of limiting the global average temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And any climate law or policy that is not based on the current best available science and does not include the global aspect of equity nor the annual emissions reductions needed starting now will be completely insufficient, of course. Such a law sends a strong signal that real sufficient action is taking place when in fact it is not. The hard truth is that neither the awareness nor the politics needed are anywhere in sight. We are still in a crisis that has never once been treated as a crisis. We do have a lot of brilliant solutions. We have unprecedented wealth and financial assets. We have a lot of goodwill and countless of people ready to do everything they can to help. What we do not have is awareness, leadership, and above all, time. Our rapidly disappearing carbon budgets are the bottom line that sums up the current best available climate science, no matter how insufficient they may be, as they don't include tipping points, most feedback loops, equity, nor additional warming hidden by air pollution. They are still the most reliable roadmap we have to safeguard the future living conditions for humankind. But the content of these budgets have never been taken into account in today's politics. It has never been communicated in mainstream media, and yet here you are trying to create laws and policies, once again ignoring it. pretending that your plan or policy disregarding the united science will somehow solve the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced. Pretending that a law that no one has to follow is a law. And pretending that you can be a climate leader and still go on building and subsidizing new fossil fuel infrastructure. Pretending that leaving out the global aspect of climate justice and equity won't risk breaking up the entire Paris Agreement. Pretending that empty words will make this emergency go away. This must come to an end. No policy, plan, or deal will be nearly enough as long as you just continue to ignore the CO2 budget which applies for today. We don't just need goals for 2030 or 2050, we above all need them for 2020 and for every following year to come. We need to start cutting our emissions drastically at the source now. Your distant targets will mean nothing if high emissions continue like today's business as usual, even for just a few more years, because that will use up our remaining carbon budget before you will even have the chance to deliver on your 2030 or 2050 goals. And since these negative emissions technologies that this law fully relies on don't exist today at scale and perhaps never will, we simply need to change our behavior, change our society. And this is the uncomfortable truth that you cannot escape, no matter how badly you want to or how hard you try. And the longer you keep running away from that truth, the bigger your betrayal towards your own children. The EU must lead the way. You have the moral obligation to do so, and you have a unique economical and political opportunity to become a real climate leader. You yourselves declared that we are in a climate and environment emergency. You said this was an existential threat. Now you must prove that you mean it. And we will not be satisfied with anything less than a science-based pathway which gives us the best possible chance to safeguard the future living conditions for humanity and life on Earth as we know it. Anything else is surrender. This climate law is surrender, because nature doesn't bargain and you cannot make deals with physics. And we will not allow you to surrender on our future. Thank you.
The woman in the red there.
Thank you. So I'm going to give the floor to the political groups represented by their coordinators in ENVI. starting with the EPP, with Peter Liese for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Greta, for your very impressive statement and for all the engagement of the last months. For me, it's important that you represent millions of young people in Europe and all over the globe. And I meet the Fridays for Future people in my constituency very constantly, and I'm always very impressed how deep their knowledge is and how strong their personal commitment is. For example, I met a young girl that traveled to a Fridays for Future event, 25 kilometers only, but she took 3 hours because she was not ready to ask somebody to drive her by car, but she used the public transport. And I met many other examples. The science is clear when we just implement the commitment that all the parties gave for the Paris Agreement. The temperature will rise probably above 3 degrees. And this is linked to a very high risk that we cross the dangerous tipping points, like the melting of the Greenlandic ice fields or the melting of the permafrost in the northern hemisphere. And that's why I understand the motivation of your generation. My children are only a few years older. If we don't act soon, there will be a situation, maybe in 30, 40 years, where your generation and your children are not able to control climate change anymore. And that's why all the parties have to do more than they committed in the Paris Agreement, all parties to the agreement. For my political group, the EPP group, I would highlight 3 concrete points that we want to implement. First of all, we want to invest more in research and innovation, for example, to decarbonize industry. I think it must be possible to keep the industry, but to make them cleaner and climate friendly. There we should also show the way for other major economies like China and India. And we were successful together. It's a huge priority for the European Parliament. The problem is the member states, the finance ministers and the heads of state are proposing to cut the budget for innovation. And that's why I think we all need to fight that the member states will accept their responsibility. Second point, we have a huge problem in the European forests. Because of climate change, we have drought, we have heat waves the last 2 years. Forest owners are no longer getting any benefit from their business. And forest is important for the climate. It's the most important thing that we have in Europe. And it's also a good example that economic problems and climate problems go hand in hand if we don't tackle this. Third point, and here I'm very determined, I think we need a European carbon price. We need a carbon price also in the areas where we don't have one, for example, transport and building. And I think to get there, we can talk about tax, but this needs unanimous decision with all the member states, so it's almost impossible. That's why I very much support an ETS also for these sectors. The best would be a separate one. And I think we have to talk about this. I don't think it's possible to get to ambitious climate targets without a European carbon price, and I would also like to hear your opinion here. Now to the climate law. I understand your message very well, but I have to say that I think the climate law is ambitious. It is ambitious to go for carbon neutrality, and it's also ambitious to go up in the 2030 target, even if we go only up from 40 to 50%. That is a major step. And my concern is, I don't know any other major economy all over the world that is considering such a step. And this is my last point. You crossed the Atlantic, and you met many, many people in the United States, Canada, and all over Latin America. And I would like to understand what you learned there. How can we motivate these countries and also others like South Africa, China, India, Japan, that they will increase their NDC? I talked to the European Commission yesterday, and there's no major economy. Only small states, which I admire a lot, Morocco, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, but they will not change the major bulk of emissions. So we need these major emitters. And of course, we need to lead by example. That is a very clear answer, but I don't think this is enough. So how can we convince other major economies in Latin America and all over the American continent, but also for the rest of the world? Because what I think is very clear, the science is clear, we need to do more, but we need to do more globally. And that's the major challenge that we have to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are going to move to Jutta Gutteland, the coordinator for S&D Group and also the rapporteur for the climate law. For 5 minutes.
Tack ordförande.
Thank you very much, Chair. And hello, Greta. I'll be speaking Swedish. It's an honor that you're a Swede, and it feels great to speak Swedish today. Thanks for coming here. And we want, of course, to reduce emissions, get rid of them entirely. Your voice is strong, and I can really feel a wave go through the room when you open your mouth. And I think the standing ovation shows how grateful we are for your tough work, bringing a generation together. I have been an elected member of this assembly for 6 years now, and I get the feeling that there's a real before and after the Fridays for Future movement, and I'd really like to thank you for that. But I have listened to you carefully today. I've understood that you want more, and that we've got a big challenge ahead of us. That's clear. I think what you said is right. We're discussing the EU's new measures for reducing emissions, not just the climate law that's being presented today. And I'm the rapporteur for that law in this House. Europe has the responsibility and the resources to engage in a real transition, and we need to ensure that that's done. But we also need to ensure that our transition is just and covers all sectors and brings all citizens on board. Our work has to ensure that we work together with a lot of different sectors, but also other parts of the world. And the EU evidently has a loud voice that should be heard. We're all sitting in the same boat, but the EU has extra responsibility to reduce its emissions right now, and we have to show that we're aware of that. So it's important that we should be a good example, and we can influence the rest of the world by showing that we mean it seriously by reducing our own emissions more rapidly. It's not just a question of justice, but also ambition. We have to be more ambitious. And that's something that you've raised frequently in your speeches, including today. Well, the target of being climate neutral by 2050 is one that we can't just be satisfied with. We have to be moving faster, and we need to be setting more ambitious goals for today and for 2030. So I do believe that we should be doing more. I do agree with you that the climate law that the Commission has presented today isn't in line with the science. It isn't what you would like to see right now. But I hope that we in the European Parliament will be able to do more to try and ensure that things are happening faster, that we're more ambitious, and that we can achieve our ambitions so that we can genuinely lead the world. I will be trying to do that as rapporteur on this file. I hope that the European Parliament can be the force that really fights for this in the institutions. And I hope that this can all happen before Glasgow so that we can ensure that the world will hear and that we can really provide the good example. The climate law has to build upon a system where there is a carbon budget that fits in with the targets on emission reduction so that we can see how the work is progressing. We are working very hard, and I can promise you that we will struggle, we will fight, and we get help from your work, that you put pressure on this Parliament. Our objective is that science and scientific advice should be at the forefront. That it has to be the basis for the EU climate legislation. But I don't want to mislead you. I don't want to tell you that this is going to be easy. There are very conservative forces here in this House who are against the climate action and against you personally. So there are conservative forces here that want to water down the work that we're doing. I hope you're aware of this, that there is a big divide in this House between those who do want to do something and those who don't. Maybe you know that already, but I thought it's important to say that when we're all here together in the same room. Science speaks a clear language. That's something we all know. We're coming towards a turning point. It's becoming more and more difficult for us to implement the Paris Agreement fully. There's no doubt that more has to be done. I mean, you know the climate work better than most people. You know that we have tightened up the goals on renewable energy, on energy efficiency, on emissions trading, emissions from the transport sector. There's a lot of potential. There are a lot of opportunities there for new efforts that are in line with the climate neutral economy so that we can create a better life after the transition. I'm absolutely convinced that that has to be our objective. And I want to ensure that that's actually going to happen. We as Social Democrats want to be very clear. The Social Democratic group here in the European Parliament, the so-called S&D group, we will be constantly focusing on equality and justice, the just transition. For us, it's very important to ensure that welfare, security, and climate policy all work together. So then we will get a better, safer society, and we want the work to go faster. To conclude, I just wanted to say that you are a representative of the millions of young people who, like you, are fighting for the climate, fighting to ensure a future for us on this planet. I would like to thank you and all of the young people who are following your footsteps, who are taking their own initiatives. They are telling the truth to our society. We need that. You've already transformed the debate in this House. I'm absolutely sure of it. Our group want more. We will be putting pressure on. And we will be very tough. We want to do more, and we promise you that we will struggle. Thanks for coming here.
Okay. Let's say that I gave you one extra 30 minutes for your role of rapporteur. Otherwise, I won't be able to manage the time. So let's move to Renew and Nils Torvalds.
Thank you. Jag fortsätter på svenska.
Oh, well, I'll keep going in Swedish, seeing as we share a language. Hi, Greta. Welcome back. Last time you were here, a lot of the politicians in this room were more interested in going on the electoral campaign trail. And when politicians are out on the campaign trail, they tend to promise a bit too much, and then they try to go back on it afterwards. But in any case, we have made a small effort at making some improvements. Before the COP25, we took a decision on increasing the level of ambition for CO2 emissions for 2030. So we're now going up to 55%. Well, you're telling us that's still not enough. But compared to the previous goal of 40%, then it's a significant step forward. I also had rather a tough debate on the climate emergency. Many voted in favour, but many voted against. There was a lot of criticism of our approach at that time, where we were called alarmist. But if you look around the world at what's happening, the forest fires, the floods, all of these phenomena, maybe we weren't far from the truth when we declared a climate emergency. If you look at the sea between Sweden and Finland, the Baltic, then you can see how the Baltic is being influenced. We're having a milder winters, the salt content of the Baltic Sea is falling, and it's going dramatically quickly, and that is going to be a major stress on biodiversity. I'd like to wish a special welcome to you on behalf of an MEP who can't be here today, Catherine Chabot. She was the first woman to sail single-handed around the world. She wanted to pass on her greetings because you have crossed the Atlantic. The oceans absorb about 50% of all of the increase in heat in the world. These huge quantities of heat that the oceans are absorbing are going to be very difficult to deal with, and it's going to be a long-term effort. It's going to be a big effort to achieve the targets by 2050 and after that as well. I would be, it would be 105 by that date. I don't know what side of the lawn I will find myself on. Well, a lot of politicians are taking this too lightly. You might have seen some people on Twitter on the other side of the Atlantic who think that a tweet can solve the problems that we face. Of course, Donald Trump is a bad example for all of us. What we need is innovation. And when we talk about innovation, there are some countries that are doing quite well. If you look at the innovative countries in Europe, it's Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. There's the countries with the good educational systems that are taking the lead. Well, you're skipping school, of course, but I think it's excellent that we have a good school system. I realize that you have more important things to do, of course. But I'm very happy to see that you're continuing to put on political pressure, because otherwise we wouldn't get the movement we've seen in Brussels.
Thank you. Next group is Heidi and Silvia Saldone for 3 minutes.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good afternoon. Hello, Greta. This week, the European Parliament is closed off to visitors and in some cases some MEPs and assistants. But today the Parliament is open to Greta and other people. It seems that maybe the environmentalists can't get the coronavirus. I hold young people who believe in something in high esteem, people like you, Greta, that pour passion and commitment into an ideal. However, it's becoming more and more clear that Greta is being exploited, even by the European Commission that is trying to improve its image. But unlike those who are applauding because she's in vogue, I don't want to be false. I think that the battle carried out by the fundamentalists and so-called environmentalists is hypocritical. It's wrong and it punishes ordinary people. It's hypocritical because I see a lot of young people in the streets, but I wonder whether it'd be in favor of a happy degrowth. How many young people would give up their smartphone and 5G? How many young people would give up taking a plane for €19 a flight? How many young people would give up fast food and soft drinks, or washing their clothes as little as possible, or not putting on the AC on max? How many people would give up that in order to join the religion of environmentalism? And what about the coronavirus? Are you really in favor of it because it reduces pollution in China? Because less businesses that are working means less pollution, but more unemployment and more poverty. I'm also saying that this battle is wrong because you're targeting the wrong people. Greta and co are organizing demonstrations and marches in the West, but where, despite limitations, for years we've been working on environmentalist policies. But these environmentalists never mention China, India. They never organize marches in these countries. In China, they have projects for fossil fuel plants up to 2030. In India, there are they have 7 out of 10 cities that are the most polluting in the world. and then it's against the ordinary people because we have plastics tax, sugar tax, and it's ordinary people that bear the cost. Ordinary people and citizens are being accused of carrying out criminal offenses because maybe they want to continue eating meat, or because they want to have a house, and maybe, believe it or not, want a car. The risk is that the fact that you're taxing people and you have these ideas could have a huge social impact. To want to have a zero-emission society could lead to poverty, and it would also mean that developing countries would not be able to develop. I'm not saying that there isn't pollution and that we shouldn't reduce it, but we need to have an honest scientific conversation. The chairman interrupts. There are people exploiting Greta. I believe that the Commission has to stop using ideological... The chair interrupts.
Grazie. Penso che 20 secondi in più rispetto a 1 minuto e mezzo che lei ha lasciato a qualcun altro.
You gave extra time to others. This is a democracy.
We got the message. Thank you. Bas Eickhout for the Greens.
Thank you very much, and I will just use the mic and you can hear me even then already. First of all, welcome Greta Thunberg, welcome back, but also welcome everyone in this room who is showing great interest in all the climate policies that we are trying to get off the ground here. We've never seen so much crowd here, so maybe we can keep up those numbers because we need them when we are doing and when we are dealing with the climate law. You're absolutely right, and I'm very thankful for you to really put back the science into perspective, because that is the crucial point here. Every time when we hear speeches from all kinds of politicians talking about how important climate and the climate emergency, we as Greens have always said it's not about the words, it's about the action. And unfortunately, we would have loved to see the European Commission also stepping up its plate when they came forward with their Green Deal. We were hoping that the Commission would now really turn the Green Deal into action. Today, they presented their climate law, and it is outright disappointing. This year should be the year about increasing our ambitions. And Peter Liese, you're absolutely right. We need to increase our ambitions. And your question, how to do that? By showing that we can do it, that we are doing it. But if now the European Commission is enshrining in its climate law that it will only come with a proposal by September to maybe have an increase of our emissions for 2030, then we have a big problem, because the Paris Agreement was constructed to have every 5 years, one time, a global momentum. And 2020 is the year. November 2020 is the moment in Glasgow where it needs to happen. If we are not ready, who will be? Will China work on? Will Japan? Will India? No, not if we're not ready. And that now the European Commission is saying that we may get a proposal by September, it is endangering the Paris Agreement. Because if we don't increase our ambitions and we don't get the global momentum of an increased level of ambitions, we will be stuck for 5 years on the current path. And the current path is bringing us well above a warming of 3 degrees. That's the track we're on. And we need to bend it now. And Europe needs to take action. And now in the climate law, we can have all kinds of nice Brussels bubble discussions about delegated act, implementing act. But be aware, all those instruments are being proposed to start after 2030. That's not the debate we should be having. The debate we should be having is how much are we going to increase our action now, and how to create that global momentum that the world so desperately needs. The November deadline, the clock is ticking and we need action. Thank you, Greta, for putting the science back in. Thank you for all the applause. But now I need you also to create the action, not only the applause.
Thank you. For ECR, Pietro Fiocchi.
Mr. Chair, Mr. esteemed colleagues, today marks a major milestone under the Green Deal with the publication of the European Climate Law, which legally enshrines the 2050 climate neutrality target. On the other hand, I have some serious reservation about the Commission proposal to revise the all post-2030 climate targets via delegated acts, which are a very weak legal instrument and therefore ineffective in my opinion. To be very frank, moreover, given the breadth of the European Green Deal, it is imperative that all the policy initiatives are truly impact assessed, especially considering the increased 2030 targets. To be very frank, the ECR Group is opposing an increase on the gas emission reduction targets, also because it would undermine legal and regulatory certainty, as expressed several times by the previous Commission. In order to sum up the ECR position, I would like to state the following. Number one, do not change the targets. I would like, stay with the Paris Agreement. Number two, focus on impact assessment from a technical, socio-economic and industrial point of view. We want more in-depth planning and less rhetoric and climate symbolism. Number three, put pressure on third parties to follow our path. They already mentioned several of my colleagues, but without a global teamwork, and I'm referring again to the US, China and India especially, the European effort will have no significant impact on the global climate and will cause the destroyal of our economy. I would like to conclude in a slightly unconventional way, if I may. First of all, I personally wish to thank Ms. Thunberg for her important role in raising public awareness on this fundamental topic. At the same time, I would like to give an advice, as a father giving advice to a daughter. Go back to school and go back to a normal life. Your childhood is as precious as the climate, and if you don't do something about it, you will lose it forever, as if we do not do anything about the climate, we will lose it forever. Thank you very much.
Well, she knows more about science, more than a lot of us. Sylvia Modig for the GUE.
Thank you, Chair. I will also be speaking Swedish. För att det är vårt gemensamma språk.
Well, we've got a common language. Hi, Greta. Welcome. Great to see you here. First of all, on behalf of my group, the GUE NGL, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. You've inspired millions of people around Europe. You've given a voice to the young people who want more from our political decision makers. I really wanted to thank you for the work you've done. It makes our work easier because we are trying to work hard on the climate. Now that we meet here today, I see that there's quite a lot of hypocrisy in the room. The Parliament has got all of this scientific knowledge that it requires. It can take the decisions that are required. We've all got the science, the advice, the knowledge that is required, but what we need is courage and political will to actually take the necessary steps. I hope that your speech here today is taken seriously, because otherwise this is all just posturing. Of course, it's very nice to use you as a symbol for climate activism, but your voice has been very important. It makes our work easier. The Commission's proposal on a climate law, well, we know that it's not ambitious enough. The 2030 to reduce emissions by 50%, that's not enough. That's a fact, it's not an opinion. So we have to raise our targets to the levels that science is telling us is required. And if we were smarter, we would reduce those targets even further to be absolutely sure that it'll be enough. But hopefully we'll get some help from our rapporteur, Mrs. Guteland, in trying to fine-tune the Parliament's position. We have to remember what's going on in other countries too. We're saying, yes, the EU is doing more than it's ever done previously, but that doesn't mean that we're doing enough. We have to do more. and we stand by your side in this. Thank you.
Okay, and the last speaker will be Eleonora Evi for the non-attached. 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Greta, I am very happy to meet you here in the European Parliament. I have a call for you. Please help us talking about the lack of transparency in the European Council, the Council of the European Union. You might know that here in the European Parliament, we work with a good degree of transparency. All discussions are public and in streaming. Amendments are published and translated. This helps democracy. And it has often helped to reach quite ambitious positions in the European Parliament, in particular when it comes to climate and environment legislation in the past. On the contrary, the Council, where representatives of the Member States sit, is a complete black hole. There are no minutes of the meetings, no recording of Member States' positions on each dossier, and behind closed doors, you never know if the public interest will prevail or if, as it is often the case, the national interest or other interests will prevail. I ask you to help us on this fight and to raise awareness. And I'm concluding. My country, Italy, today made the first step in the right direction, setting up at the permanent representation here in Brussels a transparency register to monitor meetings with industries and lobbies, but much more has to be done to reach full transparency in Council legislative process, thus ensuring the ambitions that we desperately need in the EU to fight the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. So unless Greta Thunberg would like to have the floor again, but I don't think so, I will close the meeting and we will be with Greta Thunberg until the very end of the room. So please, let's leave space for her to leave. And then I hope that Bas was right and that tomorrow for the discussion on the climate law in the next ENVI meeting, we will be as numerous as today. So thank you for this important exchange and see you tomorrow for the ENVI members.